My name is Julie Dickson Olmsted. I have the great privilege, actually. I don't know how I won the luck of the draw on being able to moderate this session, but I have the privilege of being able to moderate this session. So I'm happy to be here. For those of you who don't know me, which is most of you, I work at the Pattison Food Group, which is Western Canada's largest privately held grocery retailer, among other things that we do nowadays. And I'm very fortunate to be able to, as part of my work and in my work in service to many boards and projects across the country, work on things related to advancing our work in the circular economy. So it's super exciting to be here. I feel very privileged to be amongst such a wonderful group of colleagues who are all here to collaborate and make change together. And so I first want to just say thanks for including me in that space and in these conversations. I have the privilege of introducing a two-part keynote address session today. So we're going to start first with hearing from Ken Webster, who is a circular economy pioneer. And what I think is cool about this entire session in this next hour, I was making my own notes because no one gave me any about what I was supposed to say, was just my my observation that this set of conversations is coming to you from people I would consider to be visionary leaders, change makers, conversation starters. When the subject of change makers, it says, someone said that in any organization you should have at least one transformer, an innovator, and a disruptor. So at the end, we'll take a little quiz to see which one of the three of you fit each of those descriptions maybe. But Ken certainly is a circular economy pioneer. I've got some notes here in my phone that I want to just read so I get it right. He is a visiting professor at Cranfield University, a fellow at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability, and a visiting researcher at the University of Auckland Business School. From 2010 to the end of 2018, he was the head of innovation for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Fun fact, not in the bio. When he started there were 3 people in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and when he left there were 170 and growing on that team. So you have with us today someone who I will give the floor to so that we can get every moment of the time and information you're willing to share. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping this mic is on because I've switched the button. That's good. Hope it doesn't get too feedbacky. I'll take this off. So can you, it's whistling a little bit, so can you moderate it? Okay, and I think I have a thing for slides, do I not? Is this the little button? Ah. Hey, I could... Yeah, that's working. Right. Very pleased to be invited here to do a short input. I thought I would push the boundaries a little bit on this one. But first, a sort of mini catch-up of what I've been doing lately. I've been involved in the writing of Earth for All, which is the 50-year follow-up to the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth. That's selling very well. That's got lots of circular economy in it, by the way. Of course, talking about resources. I've been writing some books, particularly around creating a regenerative circular economy, looking at different scales, how to create effective circular economy systems, not just efficient ones. One of these came out as a fiction with an economic commentary, the one there, The Wonderful Circles of Oz. And I'm involved in different sort of more formal publications like the Handbook for Circular Economy. There are several of these around now. And don't they cost a lot? You know, what? They gave me one and said there's only one. Okay. Why is that? Oh, it's £99 or something like that. Okay. We're going to look a little bit at how power is concentrated in the economy, but I was interested in that little quote I came across. You can have thoughts, but ideas, and maybe circular economy is one of them, they begin to possess men. They become a sort of heuristic for a direction we want to go in. They're not meant to be precise, and anybody who complains circular economy is not defined precisely perhaps should look for another job. Because It's a heuristic, and if you're interested at all in Nassim Taleb and his black swan and the rest of it, he says social progress is always around heuristics. And I thought, let me try that with something like democracy. Well, when you look at it, what is democracy? Is it voting every few years for a couple of parties? That's the crudest sort of notion of democracy. But we sort of get the idea it's about voting and controlling your destiny, supposedly. Now, what's hot is this, of course, in circular economy, because if we don't want to go throughput all the time, we perhaps want to deliver products as services. This has been on the go for a while, but this is a brand new report from Systemic, 156 pages, and it's free, looking at the case for everything, X as a service. They mean almost everything, but everything as a service and what it can do around the net zero thing, the carbon thing, as well as maintaining materials, products, components, and material in the highest value at all times. That's very interesting to look at. And it can be at a smaller scale too. This is a little project compared to some of the ones they were looking at. One of the reasons farmers in some parts of the world lose a lot of product is they can't preserve it. And so this is the idea of pay-as-you-use cold stores, which are autonomous in a sense they're powered by solar with battery, and farmers only pay for the amount of food they store. Isn't that nice? Really? That's good, because that enables them to have product they can sell. Now, the existing system doesn't like this because perhaps the middlemen depend upon being able to buy cheap from these people because they know it can't be preserved. So it certainly disrupts the market structure. And you can look it up under BASE in Basel. And the problem is not the technology, by the way, it's the politics. Rarely is the technology a problem in circularity, it's the politics. Because you change the relationships in terms of power, market structures, and you've got complicated contracts to make this thing work. Because it's a product of service, you're only buying the space, who's responsible for what? It's not as simple as you just say, I own this and I can do what I want with it. Okay, now let's zoom back out again. Now, this is a difficult one, I admit. I was pondering whether I bother. But if we look across the middle, this is how we pretend the economy works. You've got firms, you've got households, and you've got governments, and they just play around with stuff that's produced. Now, what are we in, the mid-20th century? We're not. We're in an age of overproduction. We're in an age of concentration of power among very few firms. And the literature and the practice, whether it's Rana Furaha looking at it from the New York Times perspective, when in the book Makers Not Takers, or whether it's Brett Christophers looking at the rentier economy, our real economy is dominated by these folks, real estate and monopolies and finance. That's where the axis of power is. Very easy money, particularly since 2008, but it was going on way before that, has allowed finance to dominate. And finance allows a concentration of power in particular markets. And if it's around real estate and monopolies, in the UK, 80% of bank lending is around real estate. And I doubt if there's any difference here in Canada either in terms of property prices. Very high or big focus on assets, whether that's stocks, shares, bonds, house prices. And so you have a situation in which, here's just one example, 1, 2, 3 firms in soft drinks control 92% of the market. Dips looks even worse because one firm dominates. The brands, of course, don't matter. It's who owns the overall business. Mayonnaise, pasta, cereal. You get this happening more and more. So what's that got to do with a circular economy? Let's go back one. The economy is dominated by finance, insurance, and real estate. Does it matter for a circular economy? Yes, because it's almost a dream job. We don't have too many resources. Now, if we now treat resources as assets and get it busy into products of service, we're now making products, components, and material into asset classes, which can be played with very happily by finance. Do you get where I'm going with this? We can fix your carbon problem, but we get to sell less stuff at more money because they have to use it. They have to use what we produce because it's in a product of service mode. Cool, eh? If you just wanted to fix the resource question, but not so cool if you like the idea that social progress matters too. This is Beth Stratford, and a reference in case you feel like digging it around. Very important quote, that's why I've left it up there, and you can probably, everybody here can read it. I could do some sort of dance routine, but I don't think it would matter. Rentier power is the power to extract unearned income just by controlling access to a resource, so it's surplus. It's not a word that's known as so much at the moment. Interesting that, though. So it's a precondition for imposing tough limits on resource use without social damage. But I've just said, if most of these resources, whether it's copper, platinum, air conditioning units, or whatever, end up being controlled by very few firms, you're going to get social damage because they'll charge excess prices. There's never been a case in which they didn't, unless they're told to. And tough limits on resource use and waste emissions are a precondition for reining in rent extraction without environmental damage. So if you want to go to a low carbon economy, you've got to make sure that rentiers aren't running it. Unless you don't mind the social damage. Interesting, isn't it? Our priority is net zero. Oh, and a bit sorry about the fact that wages are stagnant. There's a precariat working with jobs that don't necessarily last more than a few weeks on very low wages. There's social tension. But hey, we got to net zero. That won't do. And what can you do about it? Well, it's not exactly rocket science. You take economic rents, in this case, since we've got CO2 as a theme around here, we take a CO2 fee and make a climate dividend out of it. It's a perfectly common discussion these days. It's a universal basic dividend component. We all own the resources, is the idea. But they've been enclosed. So people owe us a share as co-owners of the unearned benefits. So we're going to take unearned income and give it to co-owners, which is us. That's the idea. And that's not a welfare handout. It's just a dividend for co-ownership. So how would that work? You can see on there, it's familiar, you'll know it already probably. A fee is charged on natural gas, coal, and the rest of it. The prices increase of fossil fuels, and revenues are evenly distributed among citizens. And the lower income families benefit most, but everybody gets it. And the climate dividend flows back into the economic cycle. Any problems with that? Of course, I don't think there isn't particularly. But it is taking a circular economy and applying it to the economics, is it not? Because if you're not going to do that, how are you going to get the prices to tell the truth? Prices must tell the truth in markets if markets are to be used. Well, that's sort of Adam Smithy type of end of things. So we want prices to tell the truth, but we don't want to dump on the poor people who use proportionately less of this fuel out of the whole thing. So, Beth, again, on another element, and this is why I think it's relevant today to looking at circular economy. The checks on rentier power and resources caps go together. There need be no trade-off between meeting the needs of all today and ensuring the planet is in a fit state to support the needs of tomorrow. But you can't do it by just playing with the materials cycle. is the argument, you have to also include the money cycle and a tax and spend regime which is appropriate to the questions around products, components, and materials. Oh, that sounds really difficult. Well, in a way, it is and it isn't. This is from a book that I'd recommend to anybody who likes the furthest fringes of discussion in this area. We started with products as a service, everything as a service. Why don't we have materials as a service? Because I know Canada is a country full of materials and very good at producing and exporting them and using them, of course. This is from the book Material Matters. And it's simply this, that well, you can read it there. The source material remains the property of the territory where it was mined. Only the right to use the mined resources sold across the value chain. It's a term called usufruct, not well known, a bit like economic rent, generating a continuous revenue stream back to the territory where the material was mined. So that means that even if these materials stay in use for a very long time, there is at each period a small amount of money that goes back to the territory. It goes back to the people who mined it. And then at the end of it, the material can go back to the origins to be reprocessed perhaps and then reissued. And this is why it's important to think about who owns it, what does it mean to own it, and also that idea of total product liability. The people responsible for this material are the ones that you might say mine it or at least turn it into, say, metals. It is their responsibility to have it back in good order because the revenues to all of these people in the chain are built on it. So you're incentivizing a proper circular economy, not just saying, take, make, and dispose, we'll tax a bit, and then we'll encourage some recycling at the end. That is not a circular economy so much. It's a sort of, can we make the linear economy a bit less bad by upping the quality of recycled materials? Which is not a bad thing to do. It's better than the thing at the moment. But it's how far do you want to think this through? And Walter Stahl is perhaps the godfather of circular economy. And he's been in this game for 30, 40 years. And I wrote something and he commented and he quotes me, the economy of the future is one which is drawing on notions of systems thinking, circulation rather than extraction in both monetary and material cycles, and the economics which supports all this. Thank you, Ken, nicely said in one phrase, I'll take the compliment, but here's the kicker. But who are the people driving this change? Interesting question, isn't it? Because I think what he's saying is, nobody knows that's the change that needs to be driven, or nobody's doing it even if they know about it. And I'll leave you with that as a question. Walter thinks this is basically a great idea, but who is there pitching for it? I don't know, to be honest, hand on heart. Not many people are pitching for it. Does it matter? Maybe not. If you can do less harm, get to net zero, and move some stuff around. But it's not coherent if you just do it that way, is my argument. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. It's time for some younger people here.
We do have 10 minutes for questions.
Oh,
that's
great, fantastic. I didn't know whether there would be. So you've applauded me first, and now we can have the difficult bits.
I think we have someone in the audience who's organizing questions. Aaron, go ahead.
I might need a microphone.
No, I'm okay.
You're gonna, okay.
For that product, and does that mean that in the end you end up paying far more for that product than you would have if you owned it upfront?
Upfront.
Upfront,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, it can be yes and it can be no. The reason it's both, potentially, is that if the firm knows it's getting it back, in good order because they maintain it during the period in which you're using it, they can also put it into the market again directly. They can spiv it up a bit and put it back. They're not selling new, they're selling a service. So there's nothing against, oh, well, you can't put it back in as something new. Nobody ever said it was new, but it's functional. So that's one thing. And it would depend how concentrated the market is. If there are only 2 or 3 players, yeah, you're going to pay more. Now, it also adds benefits for the municipalities and governments because it doesn't end up as waste. It ends up as high value material at the very least, or high value products and components, because it would be in your interest, my interest rather, as a supplier of the stuff, to design it for disassembly. So I can get good quality stuff back with a variety of revenue streams, and if I do it right and it's in a competitive environment, I can get you a lower cost access to the equipment. Well, if it costs you more, there are arguments around under the heading Universal Basic Services, which you provide a minimum thing. Another element in this is what I've hinted at, which is Universal Basic Dividend. So you have a minimum income. You want to solve poverty, give them some cash. Actually, there have been 314 studies into that, and it mostly works out. You know, it doesn't need studying anymore, it just needs doing, right? You know, people, it's the almost, according to Give Directly, it's the most studied topic in development economics just below some medical stuff. So it's certainly been researched, so let's not worry about that. Yeah, that's right. So you might have a combination of products of service, universal basic services, and a universal basic dividend maybe, plus employment on top if you want to do that. But the power to the worker is, I'm not going to do this job if it's not suitable. So it's a systems thing again, as you expect.
Thank you. I think, is that Rosemary at the back of the room? Question?
Yeah, it is. Hi,
Hey.
I'm Rosemary Cooper with the Share, Reuse, Repair Initiative here in Canada. Thank you. Your talk was kind of like mind-blowing. Let's get the synapses going. So if I have a, should we be thinking about categories or types of products that are best to have as a service because they have a really high upfront cost?
Yeah, it's the bigger stuff.
Yeah, the bigger stuff. And then also, they're going to be important things in terms of making low carbon choices. Like, very few people can afford like a really high-end Bosch washing machine.
Yeah.
But if I can get it at a monthly rate that's not too high,
Or
and
a pay by use.
or pay by use,
for instance.
yeah, and they can take it back at the end of 10 years and still get the value back.
Yeah.
So, and then there's other things that, are we kind of dividing things into those things that make sense as product as service?
Well, inevitably, to start with, some things are like, that's not going to be probably a product of service, but we can recover it and recycle it.
Right.
It's the bigger, higher value stuff. It's like that glass there, it's built once and washed 1,000 times.
Right.
That's almost like a product of service if it's owned by the catering company or something like that.
Could it be heat pumps?
Well, yeah, heat pumps, why not?
Because those are very expensive, and the number one thing that I hear from people not wanting to put heat pumps in is that they cost way too much.
The capital thing. So there are already experiments, I know, in Hawaii, I think, looking at providing heat pumps as a service, which lowers their cost but still generates enough revenue because it can stay in service for absolutely ages. It's a great idea for a business if you've got a long-term view.
Right.
And you've got the bankers to support that.
Okay, thank you.
Right, sorry, yes.
We have one more over at the side.
Hi,
there.
my name is Allison from Reimagine Agriculture. I really appreciated your talk. I wanted to quickly, I guess, ask if you could share a little bit more about the quotes there from Beth and kind of her focus on resource use.
Yeah.
What regulations and what do you think needs to change in the regulatory framework in Canada to move forward on these issues?
I'm going to get in deep water as soon as I say anything because I don't understand the Canadian regulatory system. It's generally the principle that there is a lot of unearned profit or excess profit from mining You know, some fees are paid to governments, municipalities, but a big lot of it stays with the firm. What this is suggesting is, well, have you accounted for the carbon costs? There might be, you know, it's just, there are fees up front for the supply of these things depending on what the carbon cost is or what the recovery difficulties are. You know, trying to look at the whole life cycle. And because it's the Canadians' nickel or whatever, it's theirs. So one perhaps ought to be paying something towards a fund which is a commons fund, a bit like, you know, the Alaskan Permanent Fund, which oil and other companies pay into, and it pays a dividend out every year. It's a political decision. It's not a difficult one in terms of economics, but it's certainly a difficult one in terms of power relationships, you know? But it's this deeper question I think it's nice for people to look at. Because when that's reduced and gone, when your nickel's gone or whatever it is, what are you going to do now? Even Norway put most of its funds into earnings from that into a fund, which supports a very nice lifestyle for Norwegians at the moment. You know, it's a choice what you do with your resources and who gets the benefit. And I'm just suggesting here that taking some of the economic rents and giving it to everybody as part of a commons pool, you know, invested pool of funds, increases the use of the material continuously and also gives people a stake in what's there. I'm trying to avoid deep water there, but I'm begging your indulgence.
We'll keep you out of deep water and turn the floor over for one last question before we change speakers, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Tessa Vlanderen. I'm with Dickson Consulting. I have a question in relation to the driving change, like final thought that you had there. When we think about change, even within organizations, there's been decades of research, lots of publications, and still we find it very hard to drive, especially the cultural change, right? I was wondering in relation to real system change, like in an ideal scenario where we'd actually all be on the same page about what that future state of systems would look like. Do you have any helpful models on how to think about system transitions and how to manage and guide that, and whether it's models or frameworks or resources that you could refer to, how to think about how to kind of drive, you know, if I do want to drive it, how do I drive it?
I was mentioning to Julie before that Walter Stachel asked me what was the most important change that improved the the safety of shipping. You know, the answer is the lighthouse. Nothing to do with the ship, right? It's the lighthouse. I'm going to use another quote at another angle, which says from Milton Friedman, which I don't usually like quoting, but he did say that there's a purpose to a utopia, because I'm talking about a utopia, and perhaps you're mentioning it too. One is that we need to know how we're doing as we move towards it, if we do. Are we going forward or are we back? But the second reason is, sadly, perhaps a reflection from an older person here, change comes when there is a crisis, real or imagined. And then politicians get scurrying around for what have we got that could deal with this? And if it's been worked out to a certain degree and there have been pioneering organizations doing bits of it, they'll go, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. We'll get into it now because people are not happy. So unfortunately, we can be forward thinking and build a lighthouse, you know, and that people respect and know how to work with it, or we prepare for some upset that will concentrate people's minds, and then they'll figure out, we've got to do something about that. And it's getting pretty close, isn't it? Burning is happening, inequality is increasing. You know, people going to food banks. I don't think, particularly in Canada, would that have happened 15 years ago? I'm not sure. It certainly didn't used to happen in Britain about that time. Then suddenly there's this word phrase of food bank. What? 35 years, is it? Well, okay. But you know what I mean? Why should those terms even exist? But we tolerate them. We also tolerate the impossible cost of housing. You know, last point from me. When I grew up, somebody said, your generation, you know, it's a boomer thing, it's a boomer quote. You boomers, you had everything for just showing up. And actually, she was right. Education was totally free, right? So university, blah, have a nice time. You want a house? Well, they can only lend up to 3.5 times your salary. So even as a teacher, I could get a little house, not a problem. And it was jobs for life. If you wanted it, if you're in this career, you can stay in it. That is having everything for nothing. Then, when it came to a more, should we call it neoliberal orientation, asset prices boomed and the value of my house went through the roof. So I'm now rich for doing nothing. I got everything for nothing when I was a 20-year-old. And all of the people here who are clearly not my age are thinking, how come? That's not fair. I mean, it isn't fair. But what I do hate is people my age saying, oh, well, I worked really hard for my house, and if the young didn't have so many smashed avocados on toast, they could have exactly what I've got. No, they couldn't. No, they couldn't. It's systemic things that stop them doing it. And heavens above, if you can't have any of the things I've had, you may as well have a bit of fun, you know? Yeah. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Ken. Thank
I'll go
you
and sit
very
over
much.
here, could I?
Please do have a seat. Thank you for sharing.